My parents took away my instruments to stop me, but I proved them wrong. Growing up in our house was a little different from what most kids experienced. Our family wasn't rich, but we weren't struggling either. My parents, Robert and Linda, owned a small shoe shop in town, the kind of place where customers knew you by name and came back year after year. It wasn't flashy, but it provided for us, and for them it was a source of pride. They had built it from the ground up, and they expected my brother and me to carry it on. My older brother, Daniel, fit into that world naturally. From a young age, he loved numbers, business, and anything that involved making deals. While other kids were outside playing, he'd sit with my dad at the counter watching how transactions worked, learning about suppliers and asking about profits. By the time he was 12, he could run the register better than some of the part-time employees my parents hired during the busy season. And then there was me, Jonathan. I was different from Daniel in almost every way. While he found excitement in sales and inventory, I found my happiness in rhythm and sound. From the moment I first heard music that moved me, I was hooked. My parents bought me a cheap little keyboard when I was 6, and I'd spend hours playing random notes, trying to make melodies that made sense. By the time I was 8, I could pick up tunes by ear, and when I was 10, I started experimenting with other instruments. The guitar, the bass, even the saxophone, but nothing captivated me quite like the drums. The way they could set the pace, the sheer energy that came from them, it was like nothing else. At first, my parents were fine with my hobby. They even humored me when I begged them for a used drum set I found at a garage sale. They figured it was just a phase, something I'd grow out of. But as I got older, it became clear that I wasn't interested in the family business the way Daniel was. I'd go to the shop when I had to, but my heart was never in it. I'd sweep the floors and stock the shelves, but all I really wanted was to get back home and practice. That's when the real tension started. Daniel, being the perfect son, was already planning his future in the business. He loved to talk about expansion, marketing strategies, and how he could modernize the place. Our parents adored him for it. Meanwhile, I was seen as the dreamer, the one who didn't care about real responsibilities. Whenever the shop was busy and they needed an extra hand, I was expected to be there. But I wasn't like Daniel, I didn't love it. I didn't see my future behind the counter, ringing up customers and managing orders. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate what my parents had built. I understood that it was their life's work, and I respected that. But every time I picked up my drumsticks, I felt something that I never felt in the store. Freedom, excitement, purpose. I could sit in front of my drum set for hours, playing different rhythms, losing myself in the sound. When I played, it felt like I was speaking a language that only I truly understood. But to my family, music wasn't practical. It wasn't a future. It was just noise. I remember the nights when I'd be in my room, trying to perfect a beat, and my dad would knock on my door, telling me to keep it down. People don't make a living off banging on things, he'd say. My mom would shake her head and remind me that Daniel was working late at the shop, helping them get ready for inventory. Why can't you be more like your brother? That was the question I heard more times than I could count. I didn't hate the business. I just didn't belong in it. At school, I found my escape. I joined the music club, started hanging out with kids who shared my passion. My closest friend, Michael, was a guitarist who had the same love for music that I did. We spent our afternoons writing songs, experimenting with different sounds. It was the only place where I felt like I could truly be myself. But at home, it was a different story. Every family dinner turned into a subtle reminder that I was the odd one out. Daniel would talk about the business, my parents would beam with pride, and then they'd turn to me with that look. The one that said, "When are you going to grow up and get serious?" I wished they could see what I saw when I played. I wished they could understand that music wasn't just a hobby to me. It was a part of me, but in their eyes I was just avoiding responsibility. And maybe, in some way, they were right. Maybe I was avoiding their responsibility because it wasn't mine to carry. As the years went on, the pressure only grew. Daniel was already being groomed to take over, and my parents assumed I'd eventually fall in line. But deep down, I knew that if I stayed, I'd be miserable. I couldn't see a future where I'd wake up every morning, open the shop, and do inventory like my brother. I knew that someday, I'd have to make a choice. Music or family. I wasn't ready to choose. Not yet. But I knew the day was coming when I'd have to. Looking back, I realized that the moment I finished high school was a turning point in my life. My brother Daniel had been studying business for 3 years by then, and it was already clear that he was following the path my parents had hoped for. He was fully immersed in learning about economics, marketing, and management, and when he and my father spoke about business strategies, it was as if they were speaking their own language. My father, Robert, listened with admiration, nodding along, sometimes even chiming in with his own experiences from running the shoe store. It was obvious he was proud. I had never seen him that engaged in a conversation with me about music. From the moment I expressed an interest in pursuing music professionally, my parents were convinced that I was making a mistake. Robert and my mother, Linda, insisted that I should follow Daniel's example and study business. They believed that financial stability and a secure future were more important than my passion. To them, being a musician meant instability, late nights, and reckless behavior. It wasn't about the art, it was about a lifestyle they feared. They had seen stories of musicians who had ruined their lives with bad choices, and they were convinced that would be my fate if I didn't choose something practical. Their concerns were not only spoken at home but also reinforced by their friends. Whenever we had family gatherings or business associates stopped by the store, Daniel was always praised. "What a responsible young man," they'd say. "He's going to be just like his father." Meanwhile, I was an afterthought. If someone mentioned that I played music, it was usually met with, "That's a nice hobby, but what are you really going to do?" I wasn't blind to their expectations, but the idea of abandoning music was unbearable. I had been playing instruments since I was a child, and when I discovered the drums, everything clicked into place. Music was not just something I did, it was who I was. The feeling of creating a beat, of feeling the rhythm in my bones, was unlike anything else. Couldn't let that go. But my parents were not going to let me ignore their wishes so easily. One day, while I was out running errands, they took all of my instruments, my drums, my guitars, even my keyboard, and brought them to my grandparents' house. They didn't even tell me beforehand. I came home to find my room empty, as if a part of me had been erased. When I confronted them, they simply told me it was for my own good, that it was time for me to focus on real life. The argument that followed was one of the worst I'd ever had with them. I was furious, betrayed. I told them that music wasn't just a phase, it was my life. But they wouldn't listen. They were convinced they were helping me by forcing me onto a better path. Even Daniel called me, berating me for disrespecting our parents, making me feel guilty for not appreciating everything they had done for us. But I had reached my breaking point. That night, I packed a bag and left. I went straight to my grandparents' house. My grandfather, Walter, and my grandmother, Martha, had always been supportive in a quiet way. They never argued with my parents about their treatment of me, but they also never dismissed my love for music. When I showed up at their door, they didn't ask questions. They simply let me in and told me I could stay as long as I needed. Living with them was a relief. I got my instruments back, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I could breathe. I spent my days practicing, writing music, and exploring what I wanted my future to be. But the distance between me and my parents grew. We barely spoke, and when we did, the conversations were short and strained. My father was disappointed, my mother was heartbroken, and Daniel acted like I had betrayed the family. I knew I had a choice to make. I could go back, apologize, and follow the path they had laid out for me. Or I could keep moving forward, knowing that it meant losing their approval, maybe even forever. It was not an easy decision, but deep down, I already knew what I had to do. I chose my own path. The first day I stepped into college, I felt something I had never felt before, true belonging. The campus was alive with sound, from the gentle hum of pianos in the practice rooms to the rhythmic drumming echoing through the halls. I had enrolled in a program specializing in music production and composition, and for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language. There was no talk of profit margins, no one asking about business strategies or market trends. Here, discussions revolved around chord progressions, sound textures, and the emotional weight of a melody. My professors, seasoned musicians and producers themselves, saw my talent and encouraged me. I thrived under their mentorship. It was so different from home, where my passion had been dismissed as a distraction. The years at college were not easy. There were long nights spent composing and rehearsing, struggling to perfect a piece for an upcoming performance. But for every difficulty, there was a moment of fulfillment, when a melody came together seamlessly, when my classmates nodded in approval at my compositions, when a professor said, "Jonathan, you have something special." I had gone years without hearing words like that, and now they fueled me like nothing else. It wasn't just the professors who noticed. My classmates would say, "Where does Jonathan get such talent?" I could pick up any instrument and play it effortlessly, filling in for absent musicians at a moment's notice. My perfect pitch and ability to arrange music quickly earned me respect. Some students struggled with their coursework, but I felt like I was in my element, as if everything I had ever done had prepared me for this. During my studies, I still kept in touch with my parents, but the conversations were brief. They didn't ask much about my progress, and I could tell they still thought this was a phase. My father, Robert, would always ask, "Are you sure this is a career?" as if trying to remind me that music wouldn't provide stability. My mother, Linda, was more reserved, listening but not engaging much. And my brother, Daniel, only reached out occasionally, usually to tell me about new business ventures he was pursuing. For a long time, their lack of enthusiasm hurt me. But as I grew, I realized something important. Their rejection, their doubts, it had made me stronger. I had spent years proving myself not just to them but to myself. If they had been supportive from the beginning, maybe I wouldn't have fought as hard, practiced as long, or pushed myself past my limits. In a strange way, their resistance had forged me into a better musician. By the time I graduated, opportunities were already lining up. A well-known indie band needed a drummer for a US tour, and my name came up. I joined them, traveling from city to city, performing in front of thousands. Soon, my ability to play multiple instruments and my knack for composing music landed me another gig with a European band. Before I knew it, I was traveling the world. Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, Berlin, living the kind of life most people only dream about. The money was good, better than I ever expected. Not that I cared much about it, but it was ironic that the very path my parents had deemed unprofitable had turned out to be lucrative. I was earning more than Daniel, who had spent his entire life following the practical route. I never rubbed it in their faces, though. Success wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. Over the years, my relationship with my parents softened. I no longer held resentment toward them. They had been wrong about my path, but they were only doing what they thought was best. I saw them occasionally, and they started to acknowledge my achievements, though they never fully understood them. Daniel, who once mocked my passion, finally admitted that he envied how much I loved what I did. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Every struggle, every rejection, every moment of doubt had shaped me. The world is full of people who choose paths they don't love, living lives dictated by expectations rather than passion. But every person has a calling in this life. The most important thing is to find it and develop it. If I had listened to my family, I would have spent my life in a shoe store, wondering what could have been. Instead, I chose my own path, and that has made all the difference.